a single conscious decision can change the way the world sees you. Marian Rojas, this video reached you because somewhere inside, you're ready to surprise everyone, starting with yourself. Have you ever noticed how one unexpected action can shift how people treat you? Stay with me, because today we'll awaken that power. And before we start, subscribe so you don't miss your turning point. When people think about shocking others, they often imagine doing something dramatic, loud, or extreme. But real impact doesn't come from sudden performances. It comes from subtle inner shifts that radiate outward in a way no one expects. I want you to understand something very important. The moment you align what you feel, what you think, and what you do, the people around you notice, even if they can't explain why. It's not magic, it's psychology. Human beings are constantly observing, evaluating, and categorizing others without realizing it. We build mental boxes to make sense of people, and most of the time, we stay in those boxes for years. But when someone acts from a place of new internal clarity, it disrupts those mental patterns instantly. Think about a person who has always been quiet, constantly agreeing with everyone just to avoid conflict. One day, during a conversation, they calmly express their real opinion, not in anger, not with arrogance, but with grounded confidence. That moment surprises everyone. It's not that the person has changed their essence, it's that their inner world finally matched their outer expression. That is what shocks people. It's the unexpected harmony between thought, emotion, and action. This happens because our brains are wired to detect inconsistencies. When someone suddenly shows a new level of presence, emotional strength, or clarity, it triggers attention in others. Neurologically, the reticular activating system, the part of the brain that filters important information, flags this as something significant. It's as if your action lights up in people's minds, and they can't ignore it. From that moment on, the way they see you changes. You move from being predictable to being someone they need to reevaluate. And the most fascinating part is this. You don't need to do it repeatedly for it to have an effect. One clear, intentional act done with emotional awareness is often enough to make people stop, reflect, and look at you differently. This is why I say, a single conscious decision can change the way the world sees you. Because when your action comes from a place of true alignment, it carries a kind of quiet power that speaks louder than any speech. I want you to start noticing the patterns others have placed you in. How do they expect you to react? How do they label you? Once you become aware of these unspoken expectations, you'll see exactly where your single conscious action can create the most meaningful shift. That's where your power lies, not in pretending to be someone else, but in finally showing up as who you truly are. People often ask me, Marian, what is the one thing I can do that truly changes everything? And my answer is always the same. Live one moment fully present, with emotional intention. Not halfway, not distracted, not reacting automatically, but consciously, here and now. This might sound simple, almost too simple, but it's exactly why it's so powerful. Most people are not truly present. They are caught between yesterday's worries and tomorrow's expectations, functioning on autopilot. So when someone chooses to act from full awareness, the impact is profound. Presence is not about doing something spectacular. It's about bringing your mind, your body, and your emotions into the same moment and then acting from that place. Let me give you an example. Imagine someone who always rushes through conversations, nodding without really listening. One day, they stop, make eye contact, breathe, and truly listen before responding. Their answer is clear, calm, and thoughtful. That single change in presence can leave everyone stunned. People may not understand what happened, but they feel it. They sense the difference, because presence creates emotional resonance. When you act from presence, you stop chasing approval and start standing in your truth. This is what makes your actions so unexpected. Most people anticipate your usual behavior, your typical reactions. But when you act consciously, from emotional clarity, it disrupts their expectations. It's not about becoming louder, more assertive, or more dramatic. It's about becoming more aware. Think of a moment when you were completely absorbed in something meaningful, maybe watching a sunset, holding a child, praying, or doing something you love. In that moment, time slowed down, distractions disappeared, and your energy shifted. That's the state we're talking about, but directed intentionally toward a single action. When you do this, you become a different presence in the room. People may not know what changed, but they will feel they are in front of someone more centered, grounded, and alive. One conscious, present act can be anything. Calmly setting a boundary, voicing an honest thought, deciding not to react to provocation, or simply staying silent with strength. The key is intention. When intention and presence meet, something inside you awakens and the world notices. This is the once that shocks everyone. Not because you became someone else, but because for that moment you showed your true self without masks, defenses, or distractions. Before you can act with true presence, you must first understand what's happening inside you. Many people live disconnected from their emotions. They know they're stressed, irritated, or anxious, but they don't truly understand why. They react automatically, repeating the same emotional patterns over and over without realizing it. If you want to create a single powerful moment that shocks the people around you, that moment must come from emotional clarity. And clarity begins with awareness. Every person carries an internal script. This script is a combination of childhood experiences, cultural expectations, fears, and emotional habits. It silently guides how we react, speak, and make decisions. For example, if your internal script says, "I must keep everyone happy," you'll constantly say yes, even when you mean no. If your script says, "I'm not good enough," you'll hold back from opportunities and avoid taking up space. These scripts operate in the background, like programs running silently on a computer, shaping your behavior without your conscious input. To bring this script to light, you must pause and observe yourself. Throughout the day, notice your emotional reactions. When someone interrupts you, how do you feel? When you receive criticism, what story does your mind start telling you? When someone disagrees with you, what emotion surfaces first? Fear, anger, shame, or withdrawal? This kind of self-observation is not about judging yourself, it's about becoming curious about your patterns. One powerful technique I often recommend is naming your emotions. When something happens, instead of immediately reacting, take a mental step back and say to yourself, "I'm feeling frustration," or "I sense fear," or "This is sadness." By naming the emotion, you activate the rational part of your brain and interrupt the automatic emotion. You stop being inside the emotion and start observing. That simple act gives you space, and in that space, conscious choice becomes possible. Another helpful practice is journaling. At the end of each day, write down moments that triggered strong emotions. Ask yourself, what happened? What did I feel? What story did I tell myself? Over time, patterns emerge. You begin to see the same themes repeated. Fear of rejection, need for control, tendency to please, avoidance of discomfort. This awareness doesn't change everything overnight, but it lays the foundation for inner transformation. You can't choose a new action if you don't know the script that matches it for you. When you become emotionally aware, you stop being a character trapped in a primitive play. You become the author, and from that place, a single intentional action carries enormous power, because it's no longer a reaction, it's a decision. And that decision comes from understanding yourself, not escaping yourself. Emotional awareness is the first step, but awareness alone isn't enough. Once you can identify what you're feeling and the scripts driving your reactions, the next step is to manage those emotions consciously. And I want to be very clear, managing emotions doesn't mean suppressing them. Suppression is like putting a lid on boiling water. Sooner or later, they will freeze. Emotional management means understanding your emotional energy, regulating it, and deciding how to respond, not letting the emotion drive the car while you stuck in the passenger seat. When you experience a strong emotion, anger, fear, shame, anxiety, your brain activates a rapid physiological response. Cortisol rises, your heart rate speeds up, your breathing changes, and your rational brain temporarily goes off. This is what I often refer to as emotional hijack. In this state, you're not truly choosing your actions. You're reacting from survival instincts. If you try to make an important decision, set a boundary, or express yourself during this state, you usually regret it afterward. That's why learning to regulate emotions is so powerful, it gives you back the steering wheel. One of the simplest and most effective tools is conscious breathing. When a strong emotion rises, pause. Place your hand on your chest or abdomen and take 3 slow, deep breaths. This simple act sends a signal to your brain that you're safe, activating the parasympathetic nervous system. Your heart rate slows, cortisol levels decrease, and rational thinking returns. It's astonishing how a few seconds of presence can change everything. Another essential tool is grounding through awareness of the body and environment. When emotions overwhelm you, focus on physical sensations. Your feet on the floor, the texture of a nearby object, the sound of ambient noise. This anchors your attention in the present moment and prevents your mind from spinning into emotional stories. Once you're grounded, it's time to reframe your internal narrative. Ask yourself, is what I'm telling myself completely true, or is it my emotional script speaking? For example, someone criticizes you and your script says, "I'm worthless." In that moment, emotional management means recognizing the thought, acknowledging the feeling of hurt, but refusing to let that thought define you. Instead, you might reframe it as, "This criticism touches an old wound, but it doesn't determine my value. You haven't suppressed the emotion, you've put it in its proper place." Let me give you a real example. Imagine someone who's usually quick-tempered. In a heated conversation, they feel the familiar surge of anger rising. In the past, they would immediately raise their voice, interrupt, or storm off. But this time, they pause. They take a slow breath, they feel their feet on the ground, they notice their chest tightening, and instead of reacting, they stay silent for a moment, then respond with measured calm. That single choice to manage rather than react stuns everyone, because people were expecting the usual outburst, and instead they witnessed control, presence, and strength. Managing emotions is not about perfection. It's about awareness plus choice. Every time you manage an emotion consciously, you strengthen your mental muscles. You become more stable, more anchored, and when the moment comes to take that one powerful action, you'll do it, not from chaos, but from clarity. That is where real transformation begins. Now that you understand your inner script and have learned to manage your emotional responses, we arrive at the decisive point, the action. This is the moment that can truly change how people see you. And the beauty of it is, it doesn't require 1,000 steps, endless affirmations, or dramatic reinventions. It requires one conscious act, an action born from presence, emotional clarity, and intention. This act is different for everyone. For some, it might be saying no for the first time, calmly and without guilt. For others, it may be expressing an honest thought they've hidden for years. It could be choosing silence when you'd normally defend yourself endlessly. It could be making a clear decision about a relationship, a job, or a boundary. What matters is that this action interrupts the emotional pattern people expect from you. It comes from the version of you that is aware, grounded, and emotionally present, not from the habitual self that runs on autopilot. Let me give you an example. There's someone who has always been known as the agreeable one. They nod, they say yes, they avoid tension at all costs. One day, in a meeting, instead of agreeing automatically, they speak clearly and calmly. I see this differently. That's it. No shouting, no lengthy explanation, just presence and truth. The entire room pauses. Why? Because everyone's mental map of that person is suddenly outdated. That single act carries more weight than dozens of empty words ever could. Another example. Someone who's known for their quick temper decides, during a heated moment, to stay silent, breathe, and respond with unexpected calm. The people around them are caught off guard. Their usual emotional script didn't play out, something new appeared. And in that space, respect is born. People may not articulate it, but they register it deeply. To identify your one conscious act, ask yourself, what patterns do others expect from me? Where do I feel stuck in emotional loops? What would surprise people not because it's theatrical, but because it's authentic? Choose one specific action that breaks that pattern. Don't overcomplicate it. Don't try to do 5 things at once. One well-placed, emotionally clear action has far more power than 100 forced gestures. And here's something very important. This action isn't about seeking validation or shocking people for attention. The shock is a byproduct, not the goal. The real purpose is to act from your true self, the self that's been buried beneath fear, habit, or pleasing others. When that self finally expresses itself, people feel it. It's like a frequency shift. It resonates differently, and others can't help but notice. I've seen this many times in therapy and conferences. A person makes one aligned decision to stop explaining themselves excessively, to leave a toxic situation, to speak truthfully, and suddenly their entire environment adjusts. People treat them differently. They begin to command respect, not by demanding it, but by embodying it. That's the power of one conscious act. So, reflect on your life. Identify the moment or space where a single act of authenticity could rewrite the way others perceive you. That moment may feel uncomfortable at first, but discomfort often signals growth. When you act from alignment, even once, the world responds. Taking one conscious action can create a powerful impact, but the real transformation happens when you begin to integrate that change into your daily life. Many people experience a moment of clarity, do something brave once, and then quickly fall back into their old emotional scripts because they treat that action as a temporary performance rather than the beginning of a new way of being. If you want the shock you create to turn into lasting respect and personal growth, you must anchor this change from the inside out. Integration begins with mindful repetition. The first time you act from emotional presence, it might feel new, maybe even uncomfortable. But if you consciously repeat that state, not necessarily the same action, but the same alignment, your brain starts forming new neural pathways. Marian Rojas often talks about how the brain is shaped by attention. Where you place your attention repeatedly, your brain follows. If you consistently bring awareness to your emotional state, your intentions, and your actions, your new behavior slowly becomes your new normal. People around you stop seeing it as a one-time surprise and begin to adjust their perception of who you are. One practical way to support this process is reflection after action. When you've taken that conscious step, take a quiet moment afterward to write down or mentally review what happened. How did you feel before, during, and after the action? What thoughts appeared? What was the reaction around you? This reflection isn't about judging yourself. It's about consolidating the experience so it becomes part of your emotional memory. Over time, this creates inner stability. You stop second-guessing your authentic responses because you've experienced their power. Another key to integration is avoiding the trap of over-explaining yourself. Many people take a bold action and then immediately feel the urge to justify it to everyone. But when you act from presence and clarity, explanation isn't necessary. Silence, calm, and consistency speak louder than 100 justifications. In fact, over-explaining can dilute the impact of your action and make you seem unsure. Trust that your authenticity has already communicated what words cannot. To sustain change, you must also stay alert to all the emotional loops trying to pull you back. Your mind may whisper, "That was just a one-time thing," or "People will think you've changed too much." These thoughts are simply echoes of your previous script. Gently acknowledge them, but don't give them authority. Each time you choose presence over autopilot, emotional clarity over reaction, and truth over fear, you reinforce the new pattern. And remember, integration isn't about becoming perfect or never sleeping. It's about returning to alignment faster each time. There will be moments when you fall into old habits, and that's okay. What matters is that you recognize it and choose again consciously, patiently, without self-criticism. With time, what was once a surprising action becomes part of your identity. People will no longer be shocked, they'll be quietly impressed by the stability, clarity, and authenticity you carry. This is how a single action grows roots. It stops being a moment and becomes a way of living. That's when the world doesn't just react once it begins to respond to the new you consistently. When people hear about taking one conscious action that can change how others see them, many rush to do it. But in that rush, they often fall into subtle psychological traps that weaken the impact or pull them back into old emotional cycles. I want to help you avoid these mistakes so that your transformation doesn't lose its strength. These traps are common, but once you recognize them, you can navigate through them with clarity and calm. The first mistake is acting impulsively instead of consciously. Sometimes, when people become emotionally aware, they feel a strong urge to prove their change. They act too quickly without grounding themselves, and their action ends up being emotionally reactive rather than intentional. For example, someone who usually stays silent might suddenly explode in anger, thinking this is their moment to finally speak up. But instead of inspiring respect, this confuses others and undermines their message. The difference between reaction and conscious action is presence. If your action comes from a place of emotional regulation and clarity, it lands with power. If it comes from unprocessed emotion, it lands as chaos. The second trap is expecting instant praise or external validation. You take a bold, emotionally clear action and then you look around, waiting for applause, approval, or immediate change in others. When that doesn't happen, many people feel disappointed or doubt themselves. But your action wasn't meant to get approval. It was meant to express your authenticity. Real shifts often unfold quietly. Some people will be surprised, some may resist, and others may need time to adjust their perception of you. If your confidence depends on their reaction, you'll weaken the foundation you just built. Instead, anchor your sense of value internally, trust the power of what you did, even if the world takes time to catch up. The third mistake is overcomplicating the action. People sometimes try to change everything at once, setting boundaries everywhere, confronting multiple people, changing their communication style overnight. This often leads to overwhelm and inconsistency. Remember, this is about one clear, intentional act, not a performance or a complete personality overhaul. Small, precise shifts are far more impactful than big, scattered gestures. The fourth trap is falling back into old scripts because of guilt. After taking a powerful action, some people feel a strange pull. Maybe I was too harsh. Maybe I should go back to how things were. Or they didn't like it, so I must have been wrong. This is your emotional script trying to regain control. Guilt is a powerful force that can make you question your growth. Instead of surrendering to it, observe it. Ask, is this true guilt? Or is it just discomfort because I stepped out of my usual role? Most of the time, it's the latter. Another common mistake is talking too much after the action. Some people explain, justify, or soften their message because they're afraid of how others will perceive it. But, as I mentioned earlier, silence and calm carry a unique strength. Your action should speak for itself. Over-explaining can signal uncertainty even when your decision is solid. And finally, the biggest trap of all is believing that this is a one-time event that magically changes everything forever. It's not. This moment is a door, not the entire journey. If you treat it like a performance, it will fade. But if you treat it like the beginning of a new pattern, its impact will grow over time. Avoiding these traps is not about perfection. It's about staying conscious. Each time you act from presence and emotional clarity, even if you stumble along the way, you strengthen your foundation. Growth is not linear, but it is real if you keep choosing it. I want to share with you a few real-life inspired stories that beautifully illustrate the power of a single conscious act. These are not extraordinary people. They are individuals who, just like you, carried emotional scripts, lived in familiar patterns, and felt stuck. But in one decisive moment, they acted with clarity and presence, and everything around them began to shift. Let's begin with the story of a young woman named Laura. Laura was known in her family as the peacekeeper. She avoided conflict, always said yes, and stayed quiet to keep everyone happy. Her internal script said, "Harmony is my responsibility." But over time, this script exhausted her. She felt invisible and emotionally drained. One day, during a family meeting, a relative made a hurtful comment. Normally, Laura would laugh nervously and stay silent. But this time, she took a slow breath, looked directly at the person, and calmly said, "That wasn't me." Her voice was steady, her tone respectful, and her eyes clear. The entire table fell silent. People were shocked not because she shouted, but because she showed up authentically. She didn't justify, explain, or retreat. She simply stood. From that day on, her family began treating her differently. They still tested her boundaries sometimes, but she had changed the dynamic forever with one kind of action. Then there's a friend, a man with a quick temper. His colleagues knew him as brilliant but explosive. Whenever projects got intense, his emotions would flare, and he listened. His internal script said, "To be heard, I must be heard." One day, during a tense meeting, he felt the familiar rush of anger rising. But instead of reacting, he paused. He placed his hands on the table, breathed deeply, and stayed silent for a few seconds before speaking. His voice came out calm and measured. People leaned in, listening attentively. That single moment of silence, the pause, the unexpected composure stunned him. After the meeting, several colleagues told him, "You seem different," in a good way. That day marked the beginning of a new way of living for Ahmed. His emotional regulation started learning to respect himself. Another beautiful example is Sarah, a university student who always played small. Her internal script said, "I shouldn't take a seat." In group discussions, she stayed quiet, even when she had valuable insights. One day, during a class presentation, she decided to act differently. She didn't make a grand speech. She simply raised her hand, expressed her viewpoint with clarity, and held eye contact. Her classmates were surprised not because her point was extraordinary, but because she stepped out of her usual shadow with calm confidence. That moment shifted how they perceived her. She went from the quiet one to someone worth listening to. From then on, she participated more, and her sense of self-worth grew with each conscious contribution. And finally, Carlos, a middle-aged man, had been in a draining work environment for years. He always told himself, "I can't change anything." One morning, after months of self-reflection and emotional awareness, he made a simple but powerful decision: to resign respectfully and pursue a different path. When he announced it, people were stunned. Some even said, "I didn't think you'd ever do this." It wasn't the act of leaving that shocked them. It was the clarity, peace, and conviction behind his words. That one action opened doors he hadn't imagined before. Each of these stories shares a common thread. The action itself wasn't loud, but the presence behind it was powerful. Whether it was a calm no, a steady silence, a courageous truth, or a bold decision, each person acted from emotional awareness and regulation. And that's what changed how others saw them. You don't need to be famous, wealthy, or gifted to create such moments. You just need to be present, honest, and emotionally anchored. These stories show what happens when ordinary people stop living on autopilot and choose one conscious act that reflects their true self. And the ripple effect goes far beyond that moment. It reshapes relationships, self-image, and sometimes entire life paths. You hold the power to change everything with one conscious act. Start today, choose presence, act with clarity, and watch the world respond. Like, share, subscribe, and comment your chosen action below.